I'm afraid I may have used my powers for evil instead of good. Okay, well, it's a little bit of delayed good, because it benefits me a lot immediately, and you, it will probably benefit in a little bit. I'm working on a project that is going to be awesome for all of us, but right now, it's really awesome for me. This video is brought to you by serverpartdeals.com, but also I wanted this video to be brought to you by serverpartdeals.com. This is a little bit of horse trading going on here. Let me explain. This is a box of stuff, and I wanted to show you the box of stuff because it's double packed. See the box damage there? That's legit. The shipper did that because we live in a society that perhaps is on the border of something bad happening, but inside the box, lots of bubble wrap and foam and everything else. But then look, there's another box inside the box, also from Server Part Deals. I mean, I guess it would be weird if the box was from Server Part Deals, but then the box inside the box actually came from Amazon. Like, how would that even work logistically in a fourth dimension? Like, we just like, inside this box, I have 15 22 terabyte Seagate Exos drives. You see, Server Part Deals is a website about deals on server parts, in case you couldn't guess by the domain name. And Server Part Deals sent me these hard drives for this project, for this video, but I've been a customer of Server Part Deals for quite a number of years. In fact, some of the cases of recertified hard drives that I've ordered in the past that have only made a passing appearance in videos have come from Server Part Deals. And so the drives for this project came from Server Part Deals, but I'm featuring them because you can get drives from Server Part Deals. Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, recertified drives. Recertified drives, these are helium filled. Basically, those are okay. I've been running those for many, many years from the 8 terabyte era, and generally the failure rate is very low. Server Part Deals warranties these for 2 years. That means that you mail them in to Server Part Deals and they will replace them in a 2-year period. And because they've been in business for a very, very long time, you can count on them being around. And the problems that I've had in the past, which is like maybe a handful of drives out of a few hundred, I've never had a problem replacing it, or at least no one has reported to me. Like, I probably didn't even handle the drive replacement myself. No one has said, oh, we couldn't get a replacement on that drive because the warranty expired or whatever. 2 years is a little shorter than the manufacturer. Like, some of these drives you can get with a 5-year warranty, but they also cost half as much. So the money that you save on a drive, it's like, oh, one of them died in 2 years. For the 8 terabyte drives that I have 8 terabyte drives that have been in continuous operation for the better part of 8 years, and they've been fine. The drives are only part of the story, and I don't want to fully unpack them just yet. The reason I have 15 drives, you're probably already screaming at your monitor, the HomeLab HL15 from 45 drives. I did the video last year, got it all put together, or earlier this year, I guess, with 12 terabyte hard drives, recertified 12 terabyte hard drives. Those are actually from Alan Malventano because he had a whole bunch of them, but that's a different setup. And those were WD drives instead of Exos drives. But I digress. The 45 drives projects that I have done in the past have historically been Seagate Exos drives. So I have a lot of representation here across a whole bunch of different brands. And also Server Part Deals has representation across a whole bunch of different deals. Did you know you can get flash drives at serverpartdeals.com? That's going to be another video. The mechanical hard drives here are in the 45 drives HomeLab system because I have decided to build my own system that is cloud connected and replaces the cloud stuff like we have done in the past. But it's going to be the 2024 edition of the Ultimate Home Server Setup. But also, we're not going to put everything directly on the internet, but you're going to have an easy time accessing everything on the internet. This video is going to be just about getting my HL15 set up in kind of a highly available sort of a way. It's going to be about bulk storage. I'm not going to replicate the bulk storage across a whole bunch of different machines but we are gonna have some replication of the important stuff. The second machine that we're gonna use, the Minis Forum MS01. So we're gonna have a combination. We've got the MS01, which does not a ton of CPU horsepower, but it can be flash-based. And we have to get creative if we're gonna attach mechanical hard drives to it. And then I've got the HL15, which is elegance and simplicity. It's an ATX case with 15 bays that I've already got up and running. Now this is the 45 Drives HomeLab 15 case. It should look really similar to like the AV15 case. Basically, it's just a relatively short depth version of their case that supports 15 drives. You know, 15, 30, 45 drives, 1, 2, 3 bays, up to 60. You can get that are extra deep. So it's an interesting chassis design, and normally it will hold 15 3.5-inch drives. You can put 2.5-inch drives in there, but I'm using one of these PCIe carrier cards, which is 8 lanes to 2 M.2. It's bifurcation, basically. And so I can use those for a metadata cache. But you can also 3D print adapters like this, which screw into the back of the case. And for this, you know, I can put up to 6 half-height 3.5-inch drives, or up to 3 of these. These are 15 millimeter tall. Basically, if you're going to run 7 millimeters or 15 millimeters. It's up to you what motherboard you want to pick. You can order it fully kitted out, ready to go. I customized mine. I only got the case from 45 Drives. I've added the Genoa D8UD 2T550X. This is a motherboard that has a built-in 10 gigabit adapter. The really cool thing about this motherboard is that it has 4 MCIO connectors. MCIO is an awesome, versatile connector. It'll do PCIe Gen 5, probably Gen 6 on the next motherboards. It's 8 lanes per connector. This thing has 4 of them, and I can take those 8 lanes and do interesting things with them. This motherboard actually supports 16 SATA devices. So I'm taking the MCIO connections from my Genoa motherboard directly into the backplane here for SATA hard drives. Now, I know it might seem paradoxical. That's a cost savings measure because this is a Genoa motherboard. That's absurd. You can actually get low core count Zen 4 based Genoa CPUs very, very inexpensively on the OEM market. Even the 128 core Zen 4 is about $3,000 to $4,000 because Zen 5 is in vogue now. And the performance uplift for the 128 core Zen 4C to the Turin Zen 5C is about 60%. So it's 60% faster, 128 core to 128 core. If you go to 192 core, it's basically a 2x in performance, which is absurd. Absolutely absurd. And AMD has outdone themselves from Zen 4C to Zen 5C. Zen 4 to Zen 5 was pretty good, but Zen 4C to Zen 5C is the most generational uplift that we have ever seen. So Zen 4C parts, pretty inexpensive, and those are not necessarily only 128 core parts. Depending on if you shop around, you can find a deal. But again, this is for the not for the faint of heart home labbing. And you don't have to do this with something really this fancy. You could put an 8-core AM5 system in here and be perfectly happy with everything that I'm going to show you. I just want to have something that I can experiment with and go crazy. And again, like I say, using my powers for evil and all that. But this is going to be my 10-year system. Well, it already is my 10-year system, but I'm upgrading it. 850 watt power supply. I probably should bump that up again, but it's fine. It's fine for now. The idle power in this thing with the 12 terabyte hard drives was really good. It was only around 220 watts real world. It could be as low as 100 and some watts, but real world 200 and some watts, which really wasn't bad. And then DDR5 registered ECC memory. Now, this motherboard has 4 X16 slots, so you've got a lot of room at the bottom here. You could 3D print some more 3.5-inch, 2.5-inch drive storage down here for flash drives if you wanted to. It has dual 2280 M.2s on board. There's a lot of flexibility with this. The other 2 MCIO headers that I'm not using, I could connect to 4 more up to Gen 5 U.2. So I could mix fast and slow storage in this. And the 2.5-inch bays, they're located, right here, right at the back. They're pretty accessible. So all in all, this is an absurdly compact platform. Incidentally, if you're thinking about using some of these for work, and you're thinking this is a really good hyper-converged solution, you would be correct. This, as a hyper-converged solution, you put 4 or 8 mechanical hard drives. That's your slow bulk storage. You use some of the other 3.5-inch bays for 2.5-inch SAS-based flash, or you use MCIO breakout cables and have some of your 2.5-inch drives located here. I actually have designed my own 3D printable 2.5-inch carrier that I can mount here. That's this. This will hold 8 drives without encroaching on a half-height, half-length X16 card for the back half of this motherboard, which incidentally, you know, I've got Mellanox dual 100 gig on the end here, and then I've got 3 3/4 length slots full height, so you can put a graphics card for AI or whatever in there. This was designed to hold drives like this, and then like that, and then you're good to go. And there's screw holes in the side here for rails and other things like that, but it will also conveniently pass through to hold one of the drives, and then the one drive on both sides holds the enclosure. So this motherboard also has another 4-lane MCIO, so neat. Now for your boot / operating system drives, you can use those dual M.2 2280s to 1 terabyte drives or something inexpensive. Works fine. But you could also use your U.2 if you've loaded this thing down with tons of U.2 connectivity. Because remember, every single slot is 16 lanes, so you could take one of those slots and break it out into 4 U.2 or 4 M.2, whatever. If you were building this as a real server, then your budget's going to be a little higher, obviously. Something like our IC dock. You know, this is the MB204 MP. This is a 4 M.2 carrier, but the cool thing about this is you can do that and add or remove your 4 M.2. It's got a nice heat sink, adequate cooling. That and your PCIe card, and you've got a really easy, accessible way of quickly changing an M.2 should an M.2 die. And again, this is still an absurdly compact platform. Building a cluster out of these, you've got 2 or 3 of these in a stack, and then you've got a very, very highly available, you know, up to 192 cores in each one, again, if you're doing this for work. I love the compactness, configurability of this platform. There are ATX dual redundant power supplies. We took a look at one from FSP Group, which is, you know, dual up to 950 watt power supplies in an ATX power supply form factor. That would work wonderfully in this case. 45 Drives also sells cases that will do redundant power. You could go with the Q30, which is a little deeper than this, and get official server grade redundant power supplies. Again, if you're doing this for work. If you're doing a cluster though, do you really need redundant power supplies? You can just let the cluster. And then, oh, the power supply died. Well, fix the power supply in the cluster. I probably would, like if it was me and I was doing the bean counting, I probably would opt for the redundant power supplies because it is a common thing that dies or has problems. And the labor savings of, oh, the power supply died, let me just slide the old one out, slide the new one in, will offset the cost of putting in redundant power supplies in all 3 of the machines, assuming that one of them dies in the service lifetime. So probably worth it from a bean counter perspective. What really gets me is just the absurdity of all this. This is a 1/4 of a petabyte in a tiny little box that is very power sippy. It's it's a crime against entropy. Installing the drives could not be easier. Server part deals a tiny quality of life improvement. Notch out the corner of one of these bags so it's like starting to rip. Make it easier to open. 22 terabytes, 2-year warranty. I just gotta do that 14 more times and install the operating system and configure everything else. For this video, I'm not gonna walk you through the full setup for the movie and music and media streaming extravaganza, but I will show you how I configure the ZFS pool. If you are going to use this for surveillance and a whole bunch of other things, I will share with you a little wisdom. If you build a ZFS pool with this, the more stuff that you have running at the same time that is using I/O, reads and writes, the more you should split up your VDEVs. With only 15 drives, you could use just 2 drives for redundancy and, you know, in a RAID Z2 type of configuration, and have just 1 VDEV. That will work fine for media storage, but I would not recommend that if you are also running VMs and other things that use these drives for bulk storage. Even if you're using, you know, something like Optane or another ZFS metadata special device. The reason for that is performance. If you want the best performance to not spending a lot of money ratio, the way that I would recommend that you configure this is 4 RAID Z1 VDEVs. Now you could go a full striped mirror configuration, but that's going to use up like half your drives, and then you're going to have one spare, which just seems silly. 4 drives, 3 drives of capacity, RAID Z1, and then you have a hot spare. This is not quite as good as RAID Z2, but it's fine, basically. If one of the drives fails, whichever VDEV has a failed drive will use the spare drive. Basically, one drive is sitting as a hot spare, and it uses it. You could also go the D-RAID option. And so with the D-RAID, this is a new ZFS geometry, but there are performance implications of that. With 4 VDEVs, the performance is really good. You're giving up 4 + 1 drives worth of capacity. So you've got 10 drives of storage and 5 drives that are part of your redundancy solution. But you get really good performance as a result of doing that. And that's still almost a 1/4 petabyte of usable information. 200 terabytes, easy. That's absurd in a chassis this small. 200 terabytes. Do you realize that YouTube in 2005 was only 40 terabytes? You can have all of YouTube up to 2005 and 4 times over. For my cooler, I'm also using Arctic's SP5 cooler, which is not quite out yet, very soon. I've got a separate video on that coming up. Arctic's SP5 cooler is probably the best tower cooler for SP5. It is oriented the correct way. It is a fantastic cooler. I can't say enough good things about it. It's going to get its own video. But for now, Arctic SP5. Arctic fans are also so good that I'm really tempted to replace all the fans in this with Arctic fans. Arctic has some really nice 140 millimeter fans. You should check those out. Oh, and I almost forgot. The MS-01, if you're not enthused about the USB disk connectivity, you can use that PCIe slot and connect a host bus adapter. It's going to need active cooling though. So I took apart an old graphics card, SC740, something like that, single slot, ancient dual DVI graphics card. It had died of a heat death anyway because no one repasted it, and used that for active cooling. Yeah, I had to solder my own wires in order to do that, but that is sufficient to give us 8 serial attached SCSI channels, and that can go externally to one of our LSI disk shelves. And that works just fine on the MS-01. Had friends that have used this configuration specifically for their setup because they were too cheap to buy an HL15. Makes sense. I could live with that. Alright, thanks to server part deals, I've got sort of the ultimate home setup that's highly available and redundant. We've done the forbidden router thing as a virtual machine with this setup. So the first ingredient is the MS-01 that I went over before. Now this has only got a USB connection to a 4x 16 terabyte external hard drive. This is not full replication. This is a replica of only the most important data that I have. So when I think about my format shifted DVD collection and old things that I've recorded off of television using Myth TV, which is perfectly reasonable to do, that is many terabytes of storage. I have a copy of the media that I have from that's offline, and I also have my original DVDs. So I can always format shift my DVDs again if I absolutely have to. Probably, maybe, sort of, kinda. Gray area notwithstanding. The MS-01 and the hard drives are connected to my core switch, my 10 gigabit switch. I only have one of these. This is technically a single point of failure, but the MS-01 has dual 10 gig connections, dual SFP+, and so I could run dual 10 gig connections if I want. I've also got 2 ISP connections, and those are also going into the switch. This is a little unusual because normally you have a router and your ISP modem would plug into your router and then the router would plug into your switch, or your ISP modem acts as a switch. In this case, we've set up VLANs. This is the other missing piece of the puzzle. So with VLANs, it isolates the ports from the rest of the switch. So when you plug your ISP modem into the switch, that doesn't normally just work unless the modem from the ISP, or the equipment from the ISP, most accurately, is not also doing routing, network address translation, providing an IPv6 subnet, something along those lines. By doing this into the switch, it means we can have a Forbidden Router virtual machine that runs on either the HL15 or the MS-01. Both of them have plenty of horsepower in order to make that happen. Not a big deal. The other nice thing is I can split the load a little bit. If I want to use the 16 terabyte storage for video, but I'm okay if the video, like if something catastrophic goes down with this, I'm okay to lose surveillance video, but I don't want to lose the operating system for like the camera surveillance system and like, you know, what time did the mailman come today and that sort of stuff. I can replicate that between the HL15 and the MS-01. That's going to be another video or something on the forum, or there's a million guides on setting that up. If this interests you, come hang out in the Level 1 forum. That's what our community is all about. And then the HL15, of course, with its 10 gig connection, I can run a zillion virtual machines and do state management. So for me, it's not just media, it's also books and maintaining state with books. And even like video game emulation, which is increasingly verboten in our dystopian world. It's like, oh, you bought the console and you can't format shift that. We, if you're watching this video, got to work on making sure that our rights are protected under the law. Because I think we've lost sight of some things and we're losing our property rights slowly but surely. And don't call me Shirley. So the HL15 with this kind of storage capacity offers a ton of really interesting options. Now I mentioned about backups and replicas and I'm not really super worried about it. I've got an experiment going at the same time. I've got 2 slices of storage on the HL15, and this is going to be a future video to see how this works out. So I've got 2 friends that have also bought their own HL15s, and they've outfitted their HL15s accordingly, and we've set up a full mesh with replication. So I'm sending a copy of my data set off-site to 2 different places with 2 different encryption keys using the magic of ZFS. And right now we're also using Tailscale to do the connections because one of us is behind a carrier-grade NAT situation, which is not fabulous, but Tailscale will get that done. And we more or less have a direct connection because of how Tailscale is able to do the NAT traversal in carrier-grade NAT. So it's awesome because there's not really a lot of loss of overhead. And with this setup, if one of us has some sort of catastrophic situation, the other 2 can help that individual recover and get all their data back. My data set's not really huge, so it's fully replicated to both places. But I've carved out some space on my HL15 to store their stuff. And it's encrypted, so I don't have any idea what it is, which is great. This is a really cool setup. This is also kind of distributed because it's like, hey, let's do a watch party. Remember that time that you recorded Star Trek The Next Generation from an analog TV broadcast over the air and you format shifted that into a file? Let's watch that together like we were sitting in your living room, which should totally be a protected thing under the law. You can do that with this setup, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, if you're wanting to get a pretty good deal, check out Server Part Deals. They're refurb hard drives, but this isn't my first order with Server Part Deals. I'm just excited that they sponsored this video and also sent me 15, 22 terabyte hard drives. Good Lord. But this, with the Forbidden Router setup, be sure to check out all our old videos or come hang out in the forums if this tickles something inside you. But this is the setup that I'm going to run, and hopefully we can do some more videos on this. But what do you want to see? This setup is pretty interesting. I can tell you I've already run into something really interesting with Proxmox. So using Proxmox on both of these, if you run an LXC container with a Docker underneath that, and you're doing a lot of network communication from the host to Docker containers in the LXC container, or an LXC container, you're communicating from the LXC container to inside Docker, you can actually cause the system to reboot entirely. It's a kernel bug, I think. Pretty sure, because the hardware is not malfunctioning, and I can replicate that behavior on other different hardware. And so I've got to work on that. I've got to dig into that and figure out what's going on with that. Yay, debugging! But you don't run Docker in an LXC container. It doesn't give you any security. You shouldn't do that. The only reason I'm doing that is so that I can have pass-through file system stuff on ZFS, which, again, I'm really coloring outside the lines in the first place. That's a video and a discussion for another day. We can have that on the Level 1 forums. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there. Let's fill up those hard drives.